It's a pretty common talking point that the big joke behind the Mother series is what if RPG mechanics were in a modern setting, but having recently played Dragon Quest II, I think it's understated how much intertextuality there is between that game specifically and the first Mother. This is probably because both games are often written off as bad and archaic, something I dispute in the case of Mother 1, which is a shame because I think the connections between the two are a big part of what makes the original Mother so interesting. Some of these are direct inspiration, as Itoy is a pretty big fan of the Dragon Quest series and specifically mentioned taking a copy of DQ2 from the office he worked at. Others are a case of the limitations of the Famicom hardware inspiring similar thought processes. Regardless of which is which though, I find these similarities interesting enough to talk about. The clearest connection between the two is their general game feel, even beyond both of them being Famicom RPGs. In battle, you look at enemies in a first-person view and the background is a pitch-black void. Outside of battle, the Mother series takes obvious inspiration from Dragon Quest's signature command menu, which is especially noticeable when Mother 1 was released after other RPGs started to experiment with context-sensitive actions. Both games also split inventory management between each individual party member rather than providing a single bag that every item goes in. If a party member dies, they're revived by going to a specific spot in each town, be it a priest in Dragon Quest or a hospital in Mother. And should the other two meet the same fate, you don't get a game over, but instead get to keep your progress at the cost of some in-game currency. Moreover, DQ2 and Mother are structured similarly. You start out with one party member, and finding the other two is enough of a focus to have the music change to reflect how many of them you have. And after a certain point, both games become more open-ended and focus on hunting some set of items to be used in the final battle. In DQ2, you have to collect 5 crests to get the Charm of Rubus and see past an illusion, while in Mother, you have to collect 8 melodies to get the lullaby you use in the Gygas fight. However, while I could continue to go on about how both games are similar in form, there are 3 specific points of inspiration that I'm going to focus the rest of the video on, as there's more to say about what they add to Mother's narrative. The first of these 3 is the two games' respective parties. As an early attempt at a console RPG party, DQ2 is kind of weird in this regard. Your main character, the Prince of Middenhall, lacks the ability to use magic but gets access to far better equipment than the other two, making him your best damage dealer. Said other two, though, are where the real weirdness lies, as they quite literally take more EXP to reach the same levels that the hero would have already reached and also start at level 1. When this is combined with the aforementioned discrepancies in equipment, this means they're going to have a hard time with both dealing damage and taking it, to the point where it's often optimal to have them use the guard command, something seen as vestigial in most RPGs. In theory, they should make up for this by having access to magic. The Princess of Moonbrook validates this thought process by starting with mid-heal out the gate and generally learning spells quick enough to be useful. The Prince of Cannock, on the other hand, is supposed to be a balanced hybrid between the other prince's good stats and the princess's magical abilities, but because the gap in the two princes' physical abilities is just that big, he ends up only being a worse mage. The Prince of Cannock has a reputation for being completely useless, and while my inner Fire Emblem fan sees his early availability and inherent utility as enough to slightly disagree, I can't exactly say this reputation doesn't exist for a reason. Mother's main party members are roughly similar. Anna fills the Princess of Moonbrook's role of being your main magic user, and Ninten fills the Prince of Middenhall's role of being your main damage dealer, although he has access to magic himself. Lloyd is similar to the Prince of Cannock in the way that he has Ninten's physical abilities to a lesser extent, but different in the way that rather than magic, he has access to rocket items which aren't quite as useful. It cannot be understated how Lloyd's relation to the Prince of Cannock is the NES era equivalent to Itoy making a meme about Link killing Navi. He's first found in a trash can, he temporarily gets replaced by a 4th party member who's much better at the whole 0 MP physical attacker thing, and when he returns, he literally says, "Now it is the weakling's turn." But Lloyd still manages to be of use in the narrative through his technological know-how. So he exists to convey the idea of there being more to contribute than just physical strength, and some so-called weird kids having more to them than it would seem. And while that is a basic lesson typical of a game for kids, I think the way that is conveyed through parallels to a notoriously useless party member is really clever. Next similarity between these two games is how their final stretches are much tougher than what came before. The encounters in both Renderak and Mount Ebot are enough as a step up in difficulty that most sources recommend grinding at the point. However, there's a simpler solution: running. Although not quite to the same extent as guarding, running is normally seen as another vestigial part of RPGs, and something to mostly be avoided. So oftentimes, people will go into games like these two where it's an active consideration and not think to use it. DQ2 and Mother both become more manageable if you take note of which enemies are worth the cost of fighting them and which aren't. Mother even goes as far to give Ninten a spell that allows you to escape battles with 100% accuracy, further complementing this design choice. But there's one key point where these two games diverge in this regard, and that's the final battle. DQ2 has a traditional climax where you win by depleting the HP of the guy built up as the villain all game and then the more powerful entity he summons. summons. So while I was able to beat him at a lower level than most would advise, I can understand why people see this game as grindier than it actually is, because having a regular fight at the end would seem to reinforce that. Mother 1 circumvents this by having its climax resolved with your 3 party members singing the 8 melodies, causing Gygas to remember its past and flee. While Gygas can hit pretty hard, Ninten inherently has to be at a certain level because of the dragon fight. The game has better tools for mitigating damage, and your party will be at full health so long as you don't save after losing, so it's manageable in comparison to DQ2's final battle. This puts pacifism at the forefront, creating an arc where Ninten starts out beating up enemies like your ordinary RPG protagonist, eventually gets forced to run more often than fight, and finally ends the game with one last act of mercy. This arc serves a dual purpose, even beyond the obvious reason of teaching kids that violence is bad. First, it further connects the game to its 1950s setting/aestheticism because it's almost like the rejection of constant escalation of power relates to a multi-decade long geopolitical conflict or something. More interestingly though, it serves as an early example of going against the push to make violence this ontological part of gaming as a medium. The last of these 3 points has to do with a more broad theme within Dragon Quest, the idea of legacy. It's common for Dragon Quest protagonists to be defined by their blood relation to a notable figure within their world. The DQ1 protagonist is a descendant of the famous hero Erdrick, and the 3 DQ2 party members are descendants of said descendant. They are chosen one stories, centering on heroes who are destined to defeat a great evil because of their familial lineage. Mother inverts this idea of legacy by portraying Ninten's great-grandfather George as the reason for the conflict, as he was the one who stole the secrets of PSI and angered Gygas. But the other half of Ninten's great-grandparents ties into Dragon Quest's idea of legacy in an even more interesting way. At some point before the beginning of the game, George's wife Maria falls unconscious and creates the dream world of Magickin, where she is the queen. The role of Monarchy within Dragon Quest is an extension of the series' relationship with legacy, this designation of certain bloodlines as important ones. The protagonist of Dragon Quest I marries into his homeland's monarchy, making the party members of 2 royalty by birth. And the series' obsession with the divine right of kings is pretty reactionary, serving to create the imagined distant past that is common to right-wing rhetoric. All I'm gonna say is that there's a reason both the series composer and the classical musician who said composer takes heavy inspiration from had some questionable opinions on minorities. So I think it's interesting that the main monarch within Mother 1 is a false role taken up by someone trapped within an escapist fantasy. While it might seem like a stretch to list this as a connection to Dragon Quest, remember that you fight a dragon in Magickin and how you inherently have to be a certain level to fight said dragon, creating a link to a mechanic within Dragon Quest and the genre it helped to create. There is a clear juxtaposition between the more fantastical Magickin and the more modern setting of the rest of the game. And the fact that the former is rooted in the conventions of Dragon Quest/RPGs in general helps to convey an important message. Go outside! One of the big things that makes the Mother series so special is the way it wants to distance itself from the more harmful forms of escapism that video games can end up as. Mother 4 is a real world, after all. These games don't want to consume your life, but instead complement it, giving you valuable takeaways to bring with you in your day-to-day experience. An admirable trait to have in a medium that's discussed in such a way that active addiction is seen as a goal to strive for. And I think the first game's many references to Dragon Quest help communicate this. They come from a place of love, since as mentioned earlier, Itoi himself is a fan of the series, but nonetheless serve an important reminder that there's more to life than video games. Basically that thing I talked about in my Drakengard video, but nicer about it. Hey, sorry if it's been a while since the last upload. I actually hate all of you and think you don't deserve any videos from me. But the good news is that a longer video should be on its way, as this one began life as part of that video that had to be cut off. You can look forward to that longer video, is what I would have said if I didn't just now shove the flash drive it's on up my ass to prevent anyone from seeing it. Goodbye.